Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping into the intense, high-stakes world of feminist jurisprudence. We're going to explore how theoretical doctrines aren't just academic exercises. They are active, sharpened legal weapons designed to dismantle systemic oppression. We have a lot of ground to cover, from the streets of New Delhi to the deepest philosophical debates of our time. So, let's dive right in.
Act 1. The Indian Legal Battleground. To really grasp feminist jurisprudence, we have to shatter a common illusion right away. The law is not some neutral, objective referee. It's actually an active, breathing site of systemic conflict.
To see this in action, we just need to look at India in December 2012. The horrific Nirbhaya case in New Delhi wasn't just a tragedy, it was a flashpoint. It ignited a massive, relentless grassroots uprising. People hit the streets, demanding literal survival. This visceral pressure forced the creation of the Justice Verma Committee, which took an explicitly feminist approach, ultimately forging the watershed 2013 Criminal Law Amendment Act.
Behind these shifting legal tectonic plates were two heavy-hitting, competing doctrines. On one hand, you've got liberal feminism, demanding formal equality and fair access within the system we already have. But on the other side, radical feminism. This doctrine takes a sledgehammer to the very foundation. It identifies patriarchy itself as the root cause, exposing sexual violence not just as an isolated crime, but as a calculated, systemic tool of domination.
When you actually apply these theories to the letter of the law, the impact is staggering. Radical feminism completely altered the legal DNA in India. It forced the system to abandon outdated, frankly offensive ideas about a woman's morality and aggressively recentered the entire legal framework around absolute consent and bodily autonomy. It exposed the system itself.
And listen, this wasn't just an academic exercise. This theory was forged into tangible legal weapons. The 2013 reforms expanded the very definition of rape. They criminalized acid attacks under Section 326A, along with stalking and voyeurism. And crucially, they abolished the deeply re-victimizing two-finger test, finally striking it down as an unconstitutional tool of patriarchal control. The theory had successfully rewritten the law.
Act 2. The Architecture of Justice. Because here's the thing, true justice has to transcend the criminal courtroom. It's about systemic survival, everyday wages, and the reality of how we live.
Feminist jurisprudence demands a complete architectural overhaul across three interconnected pillars. First, social justice, guaranteeing bodily autonomy and fundamental safety. Second, economic justice, tackling the crushing weight of unpaid care work and the persistent wage gap. And finally, political justice. And we're not just talking about the formal right to cast a vote, we're talking about substantive, actual representation in the halls of power.
Now, the critical glue holding this entire architecture together is a framework coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality. It highlights a stark, terrifying reality. Oppression doesn't exist in a vacuum. It mutates. Gender oppression is deeply, inextricably linked with race, class, caste, and disability. These overlapping identities literally compound, weaponizing oppression in ways that single-issue laws completely fail to address.
If we zoom in on that economic pillar, we uncover massive, invisible barriers. Think about the sheer volume of women's labor, childcare, elder care, keeping households running, that remains entirely unpaid and unrecognized. Couple that with a historical exclusion from land and credit. This isn't just a glitch in the free market. It's an engineered financial dependency that feminism is actively working to dismantle.
Act 3. The Great Philosophical Clash, Pragmatism versus Feminism. We're stepping away from economic realities and right into the intellectual arena here, debating the very nature of truth, knowledge, and power.
Imagine this as a heavyweight clash between two fundamentally different worldviews. Classical pragmatism sees power as basically neutral. It looks for incremental, problem-solving reforms. If the machine is broken, you tweak the gears. Feminism, on the flip side, sees power as fiercely hierarchical and inherently patriarchal. It argues that you can't just tweak the gears if the machine was fundamentally designed to crush you. It demands a radical dismantling of the entire structure. To put that tension into perspective, look at how they view our institutions. A pragmatist looks at a flawed institution and says, hey, this can evolve with the right policy tweaks. A feminist looks at that exact same institution and identifies it as a direct enforcer of male dominance. Where pragmatists want to incentivize fair wages, feminists are arguing that the very structure of capitalism is gendered and needs to be completely overhauled.
So what happens when these two massive forces synthesize? You get feminist pragmatism. It's an incredibly powerful bridging doctrine. It takes that practical, what works approach from pragmatism, but with a massive catch. What works absolutely cannot be judged by the dominant, patriarchal majority. Instead, the truth of any legal reform has to be validated entirely by the lived experiences of the most marginalized women. A policy simply isn't a success unless it actually protects the most vulnerable people in the room.
Which brings us to Act 4, the tapestry of resistance. Because feminism, as we've seen, is not a monolith. It's a highly diverse arsenal of theories, each forged to dismantle specific mutations of oppression. Let's rapidly move through some of these critical frameworks.
Let's start with Black feminism. This didn't quietly emerge in academic ivory towers. It was forged organically from the visceral, brutal realities of enslaved women. The white feminist frameworks of the time, which were heavily focused on fragility and domesticity, completely failed to capture the lived reality of Black women. They were facing a simultaneous, crushing dual oppression of both racism and sexism. Decades before anyone was writing about intersectionality in a textbook, pioneers like Sojourner Truth were actively dismantling the system. In 1851, her legendary question, "Ain't I a woman?" cut right to the core. Through her own embodied experience of forced labor and the unspeakable trauma of having children sold into slavery, she completely shattered the exclusionary, white-centric myth of fragile womanhood. Her challenge proved beyond a doubt that the very definition of womanhood was racially selective. It laid bare the fact that gender oppression is fundamentally shaped by race and history. It's a profoundly powerful insight that laid the permanent bedrock for modern intersectional thought.
Now, shifting our focus from history to the human mind, we encounter psychoanalytical feminism. This doctrine argues that rewriting laws simply isn't enough. We have to look inward. It explores how traditional family structures and childhood socialization literally wire our unconscious minds, causing us to silently internalize norms and reproduce patriarchy without even realizing we're doing it.
Then there is lesbian feminism, which frames sexuality itself as a major political battlefield. Thinkers here identified compulsory heterosexuality, the idea that being straight is just the natural default, as an engineered institution designed specifically to sustain female dependence on men. In this light, rejecting that and living a women-centered life becomes an act of profound, inherent political resistance. And of course, we have to talk about existentialist feminism, famously championed by Simone de Beauvoir. Her legendary statement, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." Just think about that for a second. It means gender roles are socially engineered cages. Society teaches women to behave in submissive ways. While we have the ultimate existential freedom to define ourselves, systemic barriers are constantly trying to strip that freedom away. Finally, ecofeminism widens our lens to a planetary scale. This framework draws a direct, unmistakable line between the patriarchal, capitalist exploitation of women, especially rural and indigenous women, and the ruthless ecological devastation of the Earth itself. It argues that the exact same logic used to extract from and dominate nature is the logic used to dominate marginalized communities.
Which brings us to a profound mystery to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If the law is an architecture originally built by patriarchy, can incremental reform ever truly dismantle systemic oppression? Or does the struggle for genuine justice demand our constant, radical, and unwavering resistance? Think about the specialized weapons of theory we've uncovered today, and ask yourself how power is truly operating in your own world. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.